The topic we're talking about tonight is a campaign that was launched from our Ananda community, but it's a pretty self-evident campaign that I've heard other people running too, which is a response to the times that we're living in, which is we feel, many of us feel, just even day before yesterday or yesterday, there's a kind of, I'll use the word malevolence, a malevolence that's just kind of let loose on the planet. And it's just been going on for a really long time. I was just thinking over the course of my lifetime, a number of years ago when I was going on a trip to Europe, there had been some kind of violent incident in the airport in Rome. This was at least 25 or 30 years ago, probably 25. And then a few days later, I was flying into Rome. And when we got to Rome, there were soldiers with guns, every 20 yards or so. Because, of course, the safest time to go to such a place is immediately after something happens. But I remember walking through the airport, and an armed guard in an airport was just out of the question. But all I remember thinking is, I'm so glad they're here. And then I thought to myself, how quickly the mind just adjusts to a new reality. Whereas I would have been horrified to see a soldier with an automatic weapon standing ready, now I was grateful to see it. And it was just, that much of a shift. And already we're just sort of thinking this is the way things are. Now, we are living in times, World War II was a horrifying revelation for many people after all that happened at that time happened. And then the Korean War and the Vietnam War and all of these different things. Now we have a state of just tremendous uncertainty. We just never know from day to day where things are going or what might happen next. Now, this is very unnerving to almost everyone because it is the nature, the human mind naturally wants to sort of find a place where it can be secure and what you can rely on. I mean, we've been building up to this for a very long time in the sense of how fragmented our culture is in so many directions. This is the globalization of the planet, on one hand, is a very interesting and positive phenomenon, but it also creates so many unusual circumstances. I've traveled frequently to India, and I have many friends over there now. I live in Silicon Valley, which where 1/3 of the population virtually is from India, and if they're not from India, they're from somewhere else. But most of my friends of my generation in India, their children live in Australia, in Europe, or America. And or at least some of their children live there. And so it's just this, and it's very fun. We have a temple there, and many of the young Indian families there are not so interested in the traditional Indian things, but when their parents come for long visits, they deposit them at our temple. And then they pick them up later. They're so happy to find some place, that they can go that's right nearby. It's the way the whole thing works these days. And a lot of that is very positive, because the more we begin to know each other as people and where everything is not so strange, it's harder to hate someone that you know than it is to hate someone who is so other than you. But at the same time, there is a speed and a chaos to what's going on, where marriages and families and education for children and young people trying to find their place in the world, it's just all so confusing. I remember when I was just 18 and I was veering off the expected course, because I was part of that generation that really did that, and I was a little bit ahead. And I was trying to explain to my father what, now it's such long ago history, but what the assassination of John F. Kennedy did to my concept of entering into society as it was. And I was one of the reasons that when I met Swami Kriyananda, I went so boldly and completely toward him and toward the life that the Ananda communities and the spiritual life I've lived ever since, was I just really had no idea how I could find a place in the society that I saw around me. I just really just didn't know what to do. And I was quietly desperate because I didn't see any point in making a big scene. I seriously considered making a big scene. I remember standing at the window of my apartment. I was living in San Francisco at that point, 4th and Geary, for those of you who know the city, and I had an apartment that looked out over, not over the street, but over the back. And I was in a position then where I was getting up in the morning and going to work, and then I was finishing work, and then I was coming home, and then I was getting up in the morning, going to work, and I was finishing work, and I was coming home. And it was just like, I'm a grown-up now, you know, is this it? And I thought about having a nervous breakdown. I accept reincarnation as the given, and so much of how I understand myself and the life I live and other people's lives is in terms of this being one chapter in a much bigger story. And one of the things that I believe I've done frequently in other incarnations is have nervous breakdowns. It's something I'm inclined toward. I mean, I haven't this time, but it's still it's in my system, you know. When things get tough, you can just flip out and that'll solve it. So I'm standing at the window thinking about just mentally cracking up. And I really remember standing there thinking, oh, you know, it'll happen. They'll take you to the hospital. You'll be in the hospital for a really long time, and then eventually you'll get out of the hospital, and pretty soon you'll be standing here looking out the window. And I thought, it's going to be expensive, it's going to be exhausting, it's going to be incredibly disrupting to everyone, and in the end, nothing will happen. And so I considered drug addiction or alcoholism, and although it's not funny to think about it, I considered, well, I could just take my own life. You know, just in other words, anything but nothing. And it was in that reality. I had already understood the concept that there was another reality than the one I was seeing. And with the Better Living Through Chemistry, I had touched into it just a little bit because I was part of that generation. But what I learned from drugs was that this is only one of many choices. The unfortunate thing with drugs, it was a little bit like having a nervous breakdown. It's just, you would do it, and then you would be back standing looking out the window. And it awoke me to the fact, very simple, if you change your consciousness, you change everything. And it was very dramatic that way, and for those of us for whom it was a positive catalyst, that's what it did. And it did a lot for those others of you in the room who may have lived through that. It did a lot to give us the courage of our intuition, which is that there has got to be another choice than this one. In itself, it was not a useful tool because it doesn't change you. It just it changes your brain chemistry, and then you can see things or feel things. But when you come back, the essential you is not changed. In fact, it's worse because it gives you the illusion that you've actually done something, when all you've really done is just go sideways and come back, sideways and come back. And you get very confused by that because you think it's you. But that's a wholly different subject. But the point being, once I understood the concept, the consciousness was everything, I realized that I had been handed the key. And subsequently, I've read, very challenging and interesting stories from that point of view. The lives of saints, the lives of hermits in the mountains, the lives of monks, the lives of martyrs, especially modern day martyrs who are either imprisoned in who knows where for whatever reason, and go through that experience, but discover something completely different in it. There's a very wonderful man named Viktor Frankl who wrote of the book Search for Meaning. I was in Boston and I mentioned him there. I pointed up from a different angle. he realized, he became a very well-known psychiatrist after he was released from 4 years in Auschwitz or wherever he was. He realized that no matter what happens to you, human beings have one essential freedom that no one can ever take away from you, and that is the freedom to choose your response to your circumstances. And he learned it very dramatically because he was a Jew in Germany or Austria, I believe, and absolutely everything, about as ruthlessly as possible, was ripped away from him, you know, including his dignity and any respect. I mean, these are situations that are, you have to stiffen your spine even to think about them, what to think about going through them. But he as a psychiatrist watched, and he observed, and it was sort of like he was probably saved by this, that he had also a medical interest in watching what happened. And he was really able to see that when everything else was gone, you became aware of what you always were working with, but were too distracted to notice. And that's the point. You see, when there was nothing else going on, then you could see what was happening, which is there's nothing to cling to, there's no security on the outside, there's no comfort, there's nothing. Kelly has been kind enough to lend us her 4-wheel drive Jeep, which is wide open, and we went out in the sunshine and came back in the dark. What was a lot of fun in the sunshine was a little more challenging in the dark. But it was just challenging enough to stiffen your spine and not enough to make you weep, you know. But we were cold, you know, and sort of bundled up, and the wind was blowing, and it was half an hour. And I put my mind, which is something I do anyway, what if? What if I weren't going home to a warm house where I can take a hot shower and put on my booties and my little warm nightie? What if I were going to a place that's just as bad or worse than this? You know, what would I do with my mind then? By the grace of God, it's not my life, and I prefer that it not be. I try to be courageous no matter what comes, but I'm not seeking it. Teresa of Avila, she was in the 1600s or the 1500s in Spain. She became a great saint. When she was a child, and see, this was the Catholicism of the time, you live this life, and then afterwards you go to heaven to be with Jesus. So she thought, well, I'll just skip the middle part. And she understood from all that the priests had been telling her that if she could be martyred, then she would be certain that she could just go to heaven. I mean, so she just reasoned it out like children reason it out. And so at the age of 8, she persuaded her younger brother that they were going to run off and find the Moors, who were around in Spain, and then get their heads cut off, and then they could just go right to heaven, and they just skipped the whole middle part. You know, it actually was a very reasonable idea when you think about it. Fortunately, one of her family members found them on the road and brought them home, and told them that wasn't the way it worked. You know, but she was thinking about what is the essential issue here. So I'm not seeking to be martyred. If God asks me to be martyred, I'm going to have to trust that it's in my best interest to have that happen. And if I'm in a freezing cold car to go to a freezing cold next place, I'll have to trust that it's in my best interest for that to happen. But the point that I'm trying to make here is the first one, which is all we ever have is our consciousness. Our society is completely geared to keep us from never being alone with ourselves even for a moment. Most recently, I was filling my gas. I was on the road, far from home. I pulled into a gas station, and now the pump talks to you, right? And sometimes it flashes pictures. It tells you things that you really don't want to know, mostly. I was in Los Angeles, and I was going to be picked up, and so I came out of the airport to this island, you know, in the midst of, LAX is a big airport. You know, just all these cars, incredible noise, buses like this. And I became aware of yet another cacophonous sound. And I looked up and there were speakers, and they were actually playing music onto me As I was there, with all the traffic around me, and the music itself was not what you just heard. In and of itself, it was edgy and jagged and confusing. And I just thought, what madman thinks we need even more out here? But it's just like, so that not even for a second can you ever actually be with yourself. And so a great deal of what we see going on in our world right now is just rocks rolling downhill with nobody ever stopping to think about it. Turn on the television, turn on the radio, open the computer. I'm not against technology. I absolutely love what the world has become in so many ways. I have a YouTube channel, and through that, people all over the world, even when I'm asleep, they're still listening to me talk. I can't get the people in the same room sometimes to listen to me. But it's very useful for communicating what you want to communicate. So I love all that, and I can email my friends, and you can just do all those things. I don't have to tell you what it's like. Just instantly, we're just everywhere at the same time. It's all fabulous. So it's not the technology, it's the terror of being in our own consciousness. And all the confusion that sets in when we move farther and farther and farther from the source of our own self. Because how can we ever know what's right even for ourselves, what to speak of what's right for other people, when we're always just hearing all of these other ideas? Yogananda made the comment, he said, many marriages happen just because of the music they're listening to. Just, I love you, you love me, we'll be happy if you come with me, And as Master said, he said, you listen to these romantic songs, and there's somebody who's sitting next to you, and you get all these feelings, and you think that it's about them. You don't really realize that the music is just creating this idea in your mind. And if you listen to that kind of romantic music, what you feel is this the first thing that happens is this wonderful feeling comes up in you. And the next thing that happens is this great sense of longing for that feeling to be fulfilled. And the nature of that music is, it doesn't tell you to go into your own heart. It tells you to look around and see what you can. As someone said, all of advertising is eat me, buy me, take me home. But all of that starts like that. And if it's really an amazing phenomenon, if you start thinking about it, to see how consistently everything in this world pulls you out of yourself. The billboards, the advertisements. There's this advertisement that was on the road up to Ananda Village, and I guess Reno is on the road beyond that. Let yourself go in Reno, it says. And Swami says, they don't look like that. They look like they're falling apart at the seams. You see these sort of crazed people. And this is presented as this is what we're trying to do. The farther you get away from yourself, the better off you are. And the really ghastly things that we see happening are all just the same thing, just taken farther and farther. Where does my satisfaction come from? It comes from how I act in this world. It comes when I have power over you. And everybody's learning lessons in very different ways. When Yogananda first came to America in 1920, his first book was something called The Science of Religion. Subsequently, Swami Kriyananda rewrote that book completely. It's now called God is for Everyone, because it was ghost-written for Yogananda. That was his justification. And it wasn't really exactly right. But he thought, here's Yogananda being called by the masters to leave India and come to the incredibly materialistic West. We're so accustomed to it, we don't even think about it. But it's different. The whole world has become like us now. I was visiting in Venice, staying in old Venice, which was a little hard to find your way around, but to find the hotel, all you had to do was turn left at the Burger King. I'm way in the bowels of old Venice, but there's the Burger King, even in there like this. But that's what we're in. But he had to come to America. He did not want to bring Hinduism, because Hinduism is a branch of truth, is not truth itself. He wanted to speak about the original teachings of Christ, but it was not going to be the churches. It wasn't going to be Catholicism. And his role was to show how the principles behind all religions are the same, not the practices. You get into a lot of trouble. Not the dogmas, but the truth. So he tried to think, what is the unifying reality among all people? And he came up with two very simple things. Every sentient creature, from the worm to the saint, is trying to escape suffering and to experience whatever they feel to be happiness. I mean, you take a worm and you prick it with a pin, if you're unkind enough to do it, and it'll try to get away. It has enough consciousness to experience that it hurts and to try to do something to alleviate that suffering. And every decision that we ever make in life is because somehow we thought it would reduce our suffering and increase our happiness. In retrospect, maybe some of those decisions were not so wise. My favorite phrase, which I always tell myself, is, it seemed like a good idea at the time. And it's quite amazing what seemed like a good idea at the time. But at the time, somehow we thought it would alleviate suffering and increase happiness. And all of spirituality, all of religion, everything is just, everything that leads us to a deeper understanding is what does that. And so people are at very different vibrations of how they escape suffering and how they find happiness. Some of them just load themselves down with money and opulence and luxury and lording it over others. And some people really think the way to escape suffering is to really have power over people or to carry out revenge. Yogananda says something that's actually quite chilling, but it's very interesting to think about. Speaking in terms of God realization attained over many incarnations, he said, everything that we are no longer drawn to do, it's because we have tried it. We have tested it to see whether it will alleviate our suffering and give us happiness, and we have found out whether or not it does. And then we know, and then we don't do it anymore. Now that comes down, we can look at our own lives and see cycles that we've been through. Anyone who has, beaten a substance addiction of any kind deserves a tremendous amount of credit for figuring it out and knowing now. But that applies to murder, pillaging, torturing other people, because you can see by looking around that somebody thinks that's going to make them feel better. And if you know it's not going to work for you, it's because, according to what he said, you've actually experienced it and now you know. Because the difficult problem of this process of getting free, getting a perfection of our own consciousness, is that everybody around us is doing the same thing, but in their own way. And the particular planet we're on right now, Yogananda says there are many, many planets to go to. When Swami Kriyananda said, do you always come back to Earth every incarnation? Master's response, Yogananda's response was, oh no, there are countless planets that you can go to. In fact, he said, if you came back to the same one too often, you would learn too fast. I said, well, why would you not want us to learn fast? But what that actually means is, it has to be your inner knowledge, not merely that you're familiar with the system. So that I'm in that cold Jeep and I'm going to a cold place, but I have control of my inner consciousness rather than I have my systems down. But in the world that we're living in right now, this world is a place where a lot of different people on a lot of different levels of consciousness have all come in together to have very challenging experiences of what creates suffering and what gives me happiness. And there are apparently planets in which are more homogeneous at different stages, and apparently when we go to the heavenly realms, the nice thing about that is that the vibrations are always homogeneous. And people who have near-death experiences will describe how they're in a very nice place and they can see a place that's higher, but they can't get into it because it's not their vibration. And they can also see places that are lower, and they can try to bring people up, out of that vibration to raise their consciousness to come into this one. But this planet, we're all here together. So every one of these people whose values and actions are horrid from a certain point of view are just themselves doing exactly what we're doing. They're just doing it in their own way. And it's our karma to have to be terrified by that. Because what's really trying to happen is that God wants us to understand that the only freedom we have and the only job we actually have is that we have to become master of our own consciousness. So we think we're being punished sometimes by being subjected to things that completely blow our systems out. But in fact, it's an honor. We're being told, you're strong enough to be challenged by this, right? And so now we come into the very simple fact, which is, how do we deal with that? And the world we're living in is not a time, this is not a time when you can just coast. Yesterday, I guess it was, when they had that terrible shooting, in Nevada, people were just going to a completely innocent environment, and then all of a sudden it turns deadly. Now, many things are happening I believe, with these forces. One of the really terrible things that has become all pervasive in our society is that we have collectively, let me think how to say it, because we have become disenchanted with too much dogmatic, institutionalized religion, we no longer understand how to relate to the concept of a greater reality. And what Yogananda's purpose in coming to America was to give us a way to move out of the dogmatic spirituality, but into a real understanding of it. Because the whole purpose of all religious practices is to decrease suffering, increase happiness, and to give us mastery over our inner consciousness. But some methods are more direct than others. And what Yogananda's book really is about is very direct methods, primarily meditation. So let's talk for a minute about what meditation is, because this is what we're working with. In the house that I'm staying in, I was going in today and I noticed on the front porch, those little lawn dwarfs that you see, that's sort of the whimsical characteristic of dwarfs that you see on lawns. Well, here's one of these little lawn dwarfs, and he's in the lotus pose. And he's going like this. Somebody made it, and somebody else bought it. There it is. And we sort of see it all over. It's like meditation is a known reality these days. But one of our friends at Ananda Village every year, at our annual spiritual renewal week, he would collect the most outrageous combinations of yoga, meditation, and something else. Just like the best one was somehow or another people were using yoga postures and meditation to sell Hormel hams. The connection was a little obscure to me, but there it is. It's like it's all over. But what are we actually doing is really the question, because the topic today is be the change, learn to meditate, start meditating. Meditation makes the change. Well, most of our lives, we live completely through what we see, what we perceive, right? A friend of mine, I've never had children of my own, but I've been present at a number of births, and I was with a friend. She had a hospital birth, and she gave birth to this little girl, and the little girl had just a modicum of respiratory distress. Turned out to be really inconsequential, but if you're in the hospital, nobody messes around. So they immediately took the baby somewhere else, and the father followed the baby, and I followed the father. So very shortly, the father's there with the little girl. So the girl is maybe 120 seconds old. She's like just really at the beginning. Her beautiful father is leaning over her. She reaches up and grabs his finger. And I thought, oh my God, look at that. She's just out of the womb and already she's seeing what she can reach out and take a hold of. You know, it's just like right from the start, that's what we do, isn't it? And it's appropriate. We're trying to orient ourselves. He loved her, she loved him. You know, it's all, as a grown woman, they're still very close. You know, she's still reaching up her hand and taking his hand. So there's nothing wrong with it. But that's the impulse, isn't it? And you watch little children who are just really us, but without any pretense. And they're just everywhere. I mean, merchandisers have figured this out, and they put all the candy kind of low in the grocery stores and so on, because then the children see it, and they'll often have handfuls of it before the parents even know, have it even open and in their mouth before the parents even know, because that's just what we're doing. And then we get more refined about it, but still the majority of our time is spent in some way reaching out from ourselves. And this is what I was saying earlier about the rock rolling downhill. Meditation, in its best form, is when we just simply turn all that energy that we're generally directing outward, and first of all, we simply stop directing it outward. You know, you can put earplugs in, you close your eyes, you sometimes make a mudra that actually connects your energy, or you put your hands in such a way that you're receiving energy rather than reaching for energy, whatever you're doing like this, and you become perfectly still. And then the attempt is not even to let your consciousness wander out to all the other things. We call it practice, so be nice to yourself, you know. But this is the intention of what we're trying to do. And then if we have a serious practice or have been trained in any way, we understand about the breath, we understand about the Kundalini energy, we understand about the chakras, we understand about the spiritual eye. Just many different things come into it. But all of it is to take that energy that's always trying to find its security, its self-definition, and its reality, and see what happens when I stop all of it. And it's not always pleasant what happens when we stop all of it. I've taught a lot of beginning meditation classes, and I had one that was just really classic. After the first week, they came back, and I was asking them what happened, and it was a very talkative class, which was very nice. This person, as soon as she started to meditate, she began to cry. This one, as soon as he started to meditate, he became very angry. When this one started to meditate, they became very afraid that they weren't doing it right, and spent all of their time meditating, concerned that they weren't doing it right, whatever that might mean. Another just had nothing but erotic thoughts. Another one was just hungry. Spent the whole time meditating, thinking about what was in the refrigerator and how soon they could get up and go get it. Now, what you have to understand is that meditation does not create any of those conditions. What happens is when we stop distracting ourselves, what has been going on all the time, that was just the subtext that we weren't paying attention to. I learned early on in my meditation practice that what inwardly disturbed my meditation was often the point of my meditation, because sometimes I would realize realities that were going on inside of me that I was not in touch with. So the first thing that happens when we meditate is that we find out who we are if we're not aggressively running away from ourselves all the time, right? We stop and we find out, you know, who is this person that I've called myself all this time? And many people start meditating, and because I've taught all these classes and have also just been sort of standing in the same place literally for decades, so I can watch the parade come and go. You know, I say to people at the end of the meditation series, you know, you're having such a good time now, let me tell you why you're going to quit. And one of the reasons you're going to quit is this is going to start working. And it's going to start working, and you're going to start increasing your awareness, which is what, and I'll say that in a moment, what meditation does. It increases your awareness. But when your awareness starts increasing, even if you climb to the top of a beautiful hill, you also get a view down into a valley that you might not have known was there. So we start finding out what our own reality actually is. And sometimes that does not increase happiness. Sometimes that begins to feel like it's increasing suffering. Okay? And then we begin to see how people solve problems. I had this situation once where, something fell on my foot, and it hurt my foot, and I thought somebody else had caused the problem. It turned out, well, they actually had caused the problem, but indirectly. They hadn't done it deliberately. But something fell off a shelf, smashed my foot. And not seriously, but enough so that I was upset. It was amazing to watch. My first impulse was to turn on the other person and be very upset with them. Like, how is that going to help my foot? And as it happened, there was just that split second of awareness, which usually it isn't there. There was a split second of awareness that I hurt and I'm trying to pass this pain on. And it was just perfectly clear to me that's exactly what I was doing. And there was this really subconscious belief that that would make me hurt less. You're talking about Nazis, you're talking about genocide. You really are. Once you feel it even one time in yourself, somebody is, in our community of Ananda, we have this problem, which is that we know that we're not only all together for this life, but we've been together for previous lives, and we're going to be together for lives to come. So there's no way out of it. It's much worse than marriage. There's just no way out of it. And every community has people that are difficult to get along with, or sometimes communities have people that everybody has trouble getting along with, or else there's just a few and you have your people. It's just the way it works. And this woman came to me, and there was someone who was very sincere and loyal, and in fact, had proven themselves over time to be very determined. But Swami Kriyananda had a marvelous way of telling the truth in a way that was just so sweet. Yes, he said, he does have an unfortunate manner, is how he put it. So this was one of those individuals who had an unfortunate manner. And someone came to me, and they were just, I was in charge, and this person had done this, and they were so upset about it, and, just like, do something. I said, okay, how about next Saturday morning, we'll take the person out, we'll get into the center of the courtyard, and everybody can come out in their balconies and where we all live together, and then we'll shoot him. Because that'll solve it, won't it? Then you won't have to deal with him anymore, right? I mean, you go there, and it's ludicrous, but if you even have that impulse, you could see, and the impulse to get rid of, you would see how, at a certain stage of evolution and understanding, and if that's not going to work, it's only because you've tried it. Okay? So what we're working with, first of all, is we have to come to a more realistic idea of what planet Earth even is. We have to come to a more realistic idea of why we are here. And we think we're here to make everybody do it our way. Isn't that so? I mean, whether it's politics or whatever it is, the idea is it's not just a matter of zealous advocacy for our own cause. It's we want them to do it our way. And often, what we're proposing is a really good idea. And that's the hardest part about it. Sometimes when people come to me like, the example or many examples, it's a more exquisite test if you're right. That you are right in the sense that you have perceived the situation properly. But you're still trying to say, in order for me to feel good inside myself, you have to be different. And what we can understand on the microcosm, just in our little bit of world, it just keeps going out like this, And this desperate desire to make this world a place where I'm not going to have to be afraid anymore. We even have to ask ourselves the question, and it just requires a much bigger world view. View of reality. Like, what is the purpose? Are we born to just have it work out, and so we can die just the way we want to die and have no really, anything untoward happen in the middle of that? That's what people do. They try to acquire power and money and control and just make sure that nothing goes wrong. But what happens to us? Well, there's something really simple. How is that working for you? Like, how good is that? How much is that happening? I can't even get them in a restaurant to turn down the music. I used to be the police. I used to be the music police for the whole world. How's that working for you, Asha? Not very well. It's just like nobody wants to. So you have to ask a different question. What might I learn from what's going on here? What's really being asked of me? And then it all comes back to, this is where meditation comes in. What's going on with me? Who am I really? And how do I really find that peace that I'm looking for? And if any of us think, even for a moment, that if I can pass my pain on to you, I'll have less of it, we are the problem. Because as I was saying, we can understand it on a micro level. And then you just look around and, everybody's just a big baby. We're all just the same. No matter what position, whoever we are, no matter how much karma a person has to have this incredible worldly power, nonetheless, they're just trying to stop suffering and find happiness. And they may have been so intent upon it that they become a Stalin or a Hitler or a whoever that man is in North Korea. These weird karmic opportunities. And here's another thing that's even more strange. This is the strangest thing of all. We're all equally loved by God. And we're all equally divine. It's a strange thing to think about, because we're really pretty sure that God loves my candidate more than he loves yours. And you really have to sit way back and try to think, even to feel it, like, what does that mean if God loves that person? Now think of it like this. I'm very fortunate in my life. I have a couple of girlfriends. I have a lot of girlfriends, but I have a couple of real saint girlfriends. One in particular that I've spent a lot of time with, and she just loves me. It's really to her credit, not to mine. But she does. She just loves me. And I have done, and may in the future do again, unlovable things. I tend not to do them to her, but I often do them in her presence to others. Which are just, just like, how could you ever have thought that was a good idea? I don't know, it seemed like a good idea at the time. Or just make big messes. And the only reason I'm saying all of this is, but she just never stops loving me. And I love some people like that too. I love a lot of people like that. It's just like, there you are. I don't love myself always that well, but I can love other people. In fact, I learned to love myself better by thinking about this particular woman friend I had who rubbed a lot of people wrong, but somehow she never got to me. No matter what she did, I always found it amusing. And I always had faith in her, have faith in her. And so I started treating myself as if I were her. When I would start going on myself, I would think, no, just pretend that exactly the same situation was brought to you by that girl. How would you respond? You would say, oh, it's fine. You're a good person, you're very sincere, you just screwed up, it'll pass. Like that. But even the little tiny bit of unconditional love that we've either received or given, and of course for many people it comes when you have your children. Just that impossible, unbelievable, I will do anything now for this one. But that's what God has for us. That's why Yogananda talked often about her, God is Divine Mother. Because he was trying to get us to understand what Jesus talked about was the Comforter, which is so dear. I heard this, one of these little Reader's Digest things. This little girl comes home from Sunday school and tells her mom, you don't have anything to worry about. The quilt's coming next week. And the mother said, and then called the Sunday school teacher, and the lesson was on the Comforter. God God will send the comforter. So she thought the quilt was coming. It was just, everything was settled. Our Paramhansa Yogananda, of course, is the name here. And a woman who came to our temple in California, she brought her 10-year-old daughter, or 8-year-old daughter, I think, and then she came back and told us that after a few weeks of coming to Sunday school, she heard her little daughter telling the neighbors, "We're going to a new church. We believe in Parmesan Yugoslavia now." Swami's all-time favorite was the Christmas carol, while shepherds. It's the Christmas carol, while shepherds watched their flocks by night, and the children were singing, while shepherds washed their socks by night. Then the angel of the Lord, they were just there washing their socks. So let me find out where we were. Oh yes, I was talking about unconditional love, which leads us to children. But Yogananda talked about, and that was one of his particular messages, that God is Divine Mother, and Jesus put it as the comforter, because in the times that Jesus lived, he really couldn't bring in a feminine God. It just was too far. They were all dealing with this harsh judge, so he moved them to the Father, but he couldn't really quite move them to the Mother, but he slipped it in through the comforter. Because it's not really like Divine Mother is there with her little, divine apron at her little divine stove cooking us divine breakfast. What we're really talking about is putting into words what it feels like. Because that's also what we're doing in meditation, is we're trying to connect ourselves, we're trying to experience our connection with a greater reality. And we need to understand the nature of that greater reality. I love the concept of the comforter. It just speaks to me, in such clear language. I've been through, as everyone has been through, we have good years and bad years. Sometimes we have good decades and bad decades if you live long enough, but sometimes things are better and worse. And just that desire to be comforted it moves us through everything. And just imagine being able to feel that anywhere, in any circumstance. Jesus says, "I will send you the comforter." Yogananda says, God is our Divine Mother. And he even says, pray to the Divine Mother. He doesn't say it in these words. I'm going to paraphrase his words. This is the sense of it. The Father will hold you to a certain standard, but the Mother will just love you. And that's a way of describing masculine and feminine. It's not really fathers and mothers because everybody's everything. But the masculine, which is extremely important, holds this potential and asks us to rise to it. And that power is also needed. But then the Divine Mother comforts us and gives us the courage to just go forward again, right? And every single sentient being is an equal manifestation of God and equally loved by God, because wherever we're standing, we're all ultimately going to finish. This is the principle of self-realization. This is the fundamental truth. Be ye therefore perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. That which I do, ye shall do, in greater things, Jesus said. The Bhagavad Gita, it's phrased extremely differently, but we are all manifestations of the same Spirit, and ultimately, we will all become self-realized saints. So wherever you are on that spectrum, it's just the chapter you're in. And if we could see it from the real perspective, and this is what all these people who have these near-death experiences and come back now, just medicine is helping us so much to understand religion, because people are just seeing it. They just step out of their bodies, and all of a sudden they realize that the rules of the game are entirely different. And everyone, we're all part of this same reality. So our job is to experience that as deeply as we can, so that we can be the witnesses for that reality. because that is the only solution. Because the person who thinks his happiness will come by separating himself and passing his pain on to someone else is not going to get over that until he gets over it. And part of how he's going to get over it is he's going to have an experience. And where that experience will come from is from everyone else. You know, there's the most remarkable stories. I had an obsession, which I think it's a healthy sign that I don't have it anymore. I read so many Holocaust kind of stories, whether they're really about the Jews or the Cambodians or the people in Russia. I just would read all these different stories of people true stories of people in extreme circumstances who spiritually were able to triumph. And some of the ones that come out of the really strong Christian tradition, where people whose love for Jesus is so far transcends dogma, you know, that just when everything else is taken away, it's not dogma, it's just who they are. And the power sometimes of those people to convert their enemies is just stunning. And again, you see it in a big picture and you realize in a small picture, just by our friendships, by our the way we are when we go to work, by just going into a store. I used to work retail when I was in my late teens and maybe even into my early 20s. It was just, you know, patchwork jobs that I had. And working retail was real interesting because, like, everybody's a stranger. Or, you know, most people are a stranger. I never worked long enough to really have customers that I knew. But some of them treated me like a friend and like a person. Completely would change my day. One customer like that. Just one person who came in and saw me as an actual being over there and related to me as myself. I didn't need this, but I'm just going to tell you, and the other way around too. I am a Nayaswami, and so I always dress in blue. This is part of the initiation I've taken. And over the last 8 years that I've been doing this, you know, I've accumulated most everything is blue. And I say in the summer, it's not as obvious because I'm just wearing a blue dress and blue sandals. But when in the winter, when you have blue gloves and a blue scarf and a blue jacket and a blue hat, you know, it begins to show a little bit. And I went to just shop at Trader Joe's. You have Trader Joe's on this side too, yeah. I go to shop at Trader Joe's and I've got my blue socks and my blue shoes and my blue outfit and my blue sweater and my blue scarf and my blue hat. And I open my blue purse and I pull out my blue wallet and I pull out my blue credit card, which I didn't choose. That was just an accidental. And the clerk says to me, "Oh, come tomorrow and do it all in pink." Now, I want to point, see, we all just laughed. How much have we enjoyed that? And I've told that story to many other people, we all laugh. Where did that start? I was buying groceries. And there was a person in there whose own heart was light enough to just go with me, you know? And go all the way with me. And look how much light has been passed along. And that power is much greater than politicians. You know, it's much greater. I mean, they may blow us to bits. It may actually happen. I'm not one who's going to say, if we're all just nice enough, everybody else is going to be nice. Because we really don't know. We don't know what our karma is. We don't know who is going to get the upper hand here for a while. We really don't. And if we're going to try to make ourselves secure by reaching out there and getting it in order and making it stay in line, how's that working for you so far? You know, it's the strangest thing, isn't it? Nobody really wants to go to war, nobody really wants these things to happen, but we are part of a greater reality and there's something playing out here. And weird as it may seem, it's all to our good. Because we get to become bigger when the smallness that we are stops working. You know? And that's the only reason that we're pushed, is because we're simply not ourselves. Let's go back to children again. It was Peter's older sister. And this is a story I remember his mother told me. I mean, I've known all these families for a long time, and she is a very spiritual person and wanted, and the family was raised on a lot of stories of saints. So when she was small, about 6 or 7, she decided she didn't want to go to school anymore. She didn't need to go to school anymore because her ambition in life was to have a vision of the Virgin Mary. And she had observed that the Virgin Mary tended to come to children who were tending sheep. So she had it figured out. She would just wanted to be a sheep herder. She didn't really need to go to school anymore, you know. But her mother knew that even though that was her goal in life, other things were needed. So little children say, you know, I don't want to go to school. I'll just live with you, Mommy, forever. You know, and oftentimes it's such a nice thing to hear that you're tempted to, but you know, then your cute little child turns into a 6'4" Hulk, and you know, he doesn't really want to live with you anymore in quite the same way. So you know you have to say, I know something you don't know. And so this is what you have to do. Now, once again, how many times in your life has somebody known something that you didn't know? And then they pushed you in a direction that at the end you said, thank you. So where's the edge of that? You know, where's the final point? And the fact is, there is no final point. It's infinite. It keeps going. We become more and more aware, bigger, more loving. But once we get to that edge, there's another edge. I've been on this spiritual path, really, it's like 50 years. But it's like a minute. I mean, it's not just the ordinary thing that time is not what we think it is. But it's also just that whenever I get to the edge, there's just this delightful view that's even bigger. And so in our own life, this is what Divine Mother is saying to us. You think you would be happy living with me forever and never going to school. But you wouldn't be, and I know that. You think you would be happy if I let you just keep your little house and your little job and your little this and your little that, and if I would just get rid of all those nasty people, you know, so I don't have to be scared anymore. No, she says, it's not going to work for you. And what we need to really build in ourselves when we say, you know, be the change you want to see in the world, and then we finish that by saying meditate. What we're saying is find out who you are, really. You know, build that kind of power in yourself, because that's what is being asked of us. I mean, the other side of this is difficult times are sent to us because there's a divine purpose in it. And when you start actively and eagerly trying to learn what's being asked of you, I mean, the difficulty is always, I don't want to do it. I was faced with a very difficult situation, and I had a lot of ways that I wanted that situation to resolve. First of all, I wanted someone, it came down to this: somebody owes me an apology. And I started thinking back, not only in this life, but just sort of all the vibrational annoyance that I hold for how many incarnations. Somebody owes me an apology. I want somebody to say, you were right and I was wrong, you know. And then I want somebody to just, oh, you poor thing, you know. Oh, you poor thing, how much you've suffered. And you're so good, you know. Just all of these things. I mean, this is what happens. I start meditating, and then I start running this emotional saga in my mind. And then I think about it, and I realize that's what I'm asking. And then I realize that none of that's ever going to happen. What's going to happen is I'm going to have to expand my heart. It annoys me sometimes. I'll just be honest. You know, it's annoying. I want to be comforted, and I want other people to change. And then come and tell me that I was right, so I don't have to do it. It's all right, you can be very honest, but at the end of the day, you have to say, thy will, not mine, be done. I mean, you can wiggle and scream as much as you want in the middle, it's okay. Because you have to be sincere, you can't just shine it on. Anything you want, God, it's just fine with me. He's not stupid, you know, he's inside your heart, he knows what you really think. But in the end, the more we can turn that way, you see, we just start, we fulfill the purpose of the difficult times we're living in. because they are intended to make us frightened and insecure. Because if we were not frightened and insecure, we would just sit in the little mud puddle that we already have and would have no motivation to change. So what is good and what is bad? It gets very confusing, doesn't it? All of us have been through things that were just horrible, and at the end of them had to say, I never would have gotten to this point if it hadn't happened. A woman came to me all the way from Sweden, and she had a sister that she adored, and they had their whole lives planned together. They would get married, they would raise their children together, the whole thing. Then, of course, she gets cancer and dies. And the sister is just beyond agony. And as a consequence, the only place she could turn was to God, even though she'd never turned to God in her life. She didn't know what else to do. So she prayed like she never even knew you could pray. And then she had experiences that she'd never imagined were possible. All of which led her to Autobiography of a Yogi and eventually to Ananda, to a retreat I was giving. She's telling me this whole story. I took a big chance, but when she told me all the wonderful changes that had come, I said, well, do you think your sister's death was a tragedy or a blessing? I mean, that was a very risky thing for me to say. Yeah, because she could have become enraged with me. But fortunately, I was intuitively correct. And she just had to stop, She couldn't say it was a blessing, but she could see it wasn't a tragedy. So she just had to sort of sit with that. Where is that going? Which begins to make you realize that this whole world is very suspicious. Yeah. That something else is going on. And if something else is going on, why am I so afraid? Why am I so angry? I've had the opportunity recently, and I'm going back to it. I've been working on a book about my life with Swami, which has required me to be in seclusion to do it. My mind is too scattered to do it in normal circumstances. I've just figured that out this year. So I've been given after struggling trying to do that, I've been given a rather isolated house in Washington State where I've stayed. And it's in this valley, and there's a couple of other ranches, but the way it's situated, there's no internet, there's no phone service. And so when I'm in the little house, I'm just in the little house. And it's not an area where anybody comes, so there's really nothing to be afraid of. And there's, the most dangerous thing there is poison oak. So it's okay. But just all alone, and mostly I've been perfectly comfortable. But just one night I decided to scare myself. So I just, my mind just kind of, and all of a sudden, marauders were crashing through the windows and beating me up and destroying my computer and my book. I did it. I did it for about probably 2 minutes. It was a very long 2 minutes. Just pure panic because there I am all alone in the night. I mean, I did have a neighbor. I could have blown my air horn. But then I just had to think for just, let's apply a little of this philosophy, I thought. And I thought, why would God do anything to me that wasn't ultimately for my good? So it wasn't really that the marauders went away in my imagination, but it was if he sends them, he'll have a good reason for sending them. Now just see how that changes everything. I mean, I can't always do that, God knows. God knows I can't always do it. But I did just completely erase that fear with that thought. Think about that power. Just think about how much it would be worth, how much effort it would be worth to be able to pull that forward whenever you needed it. That's the comforter, you see. The comforter is, do you think I'm not with you? Do you think this is happening outside of my view? That's what we're working for. That's the change we're looking for. The change we want in the planet is not politics. I mean, politics come and go and come and go. They think they're so important, they're not even really in charge. The change that's happening is that we need to come back to our inner reality, and we need to start living from a higher truth. And I've been in the revolution actually now for a really long time, and it is a revolution. And it's working. And it's also working because the dark side is panicking because the light is getting stronger. So they're hysterical, really trying to stop it. I mean, even literally, like the fundamentalists are hysterical trying to stop the progress. It's just, and you know, everyone, there's this huge fight. It's really working because people are waking up and realizing that I have all this money, I have all this, I have all this opportunity, but I'm still scared. I need to make contact with the comforter. Be the change, meditate, and that's where it'll come from. All right? Okay. Music.